Hello, everyone. Welcome back to a new episode of Globalpulse Podcast, where we'll be discussing globalization and how it shaped the world we know it today. In 1942, Christopher Columbus discovered the New World, and a lot of things could have happened differently if he hadn't discovered the New World, and if it wasn't he wasn't a part of the Spanish Empire. So today we're going to delve deep into the impacts of globalization, what it means for both Spain from the perspective of Carlos, who lives in Madrid, and then myself from who lives in the US, how it impacted both hemispheres. So we'll be diving deep into that. To get started, we're going to discuss compare first. When we think of colonialization, it's a big topic and it impacts a lot of different countries. So first we're going to talk about the countries that were a part of colonization and their impact. So starting off with the differences between Spain and other countries, I think it's important to talk about how each took a different approach. So Carlos, do you want to kick off the first one on some of the differences between Spanish colonization and then the United Kingdom and France?
Okay, I'm gonna start explaining a bit the Spanish one. So, firstly, the main goal of the Spanish colonization at the beginning was to establish a new maritime route. Firstly, the main goal of Columbus. Columbus aimed to reach Asia, India, mainly to get a new route, but finally actually he read the opposite side. Um, we don't know exactly if it was a mistake or not, or it was bad, but finally he reached the wrong side. And although the main goal was to establish a new maritime route, the Spanish crowd start a new colonization process in Latam, extracting the wealth of the new land, actually competing with the other colonization process like the other countries as UK, France. Yeah.
Yeah.
How about you explain a bit the UK, the French process? How was?
Yeah, and like you said, it was kind of like a race. You had these
Yeah, exactly.
European countries essentially racing each other to see who could get the most land for their benefit, abstracting the minerals and all of the
Yeah,
resources that each had to offer. Yeah, and Spain differed from a lot of the other countries, and like you just mentioned, all of that, and especially like they also spread the religion a little differently than other countries. But
yeah,
the UK was mostly expanding in the northern American hemisphere. So they landed in Virginia in the US, and they started colonizing a lot of the northern, now what we know as the United States.
hmm,
And France even went higher than that. So they went to Canada, what we know as Canada today, and it was kind of this mix of you had the French on all the way up north, and then the
yeah.
U.S. and then the UK in what we know as U.S. and then Spain all the way down south with most of like Latam, like you mentioned.
It's interesting you mention this as a race because I think it was the main reason the Spanish crowd changed the main goal of this voyage, and finally they tried to take out all the wealth as quick as possible to compete against the other countries. And at the end they tried to get all the power and manage all territory as possible.
Yeah, that's a great point. And it had impacts across the board, financially, economically, politically,
Yeah,
and we're going to delve deep into that. But before we do, now that we know what colonization is and who are the main players being in Europe and essentially exploring or colonizing the Western Hemisphere, the U.S., North America, and South
hmm,
America. A little background into when it began. Also, it wasn't a new thing. Like colonization happened way before the period and the era that we're talking about. It goes all the way back to ancient empires like Greece and Rome. They spread across, even Mongolia, they spread across the world, colonizing essentially other parts. But this was the most consequential for I guess, the current time period and how nation states are set up. So that's just some background there.
Okay, yeah. So this was like, let's say, the second colonization process in the history, like the most important set of colonization processes in the history.
Yeah, I would say it's the most recent. There's probably a lot more than just two or three, but I think this is definitely the most recent in terms of how
Yeah.
it impacted our current world, I would say.
Regarding the date, these colonization processes start around the 15th century. These processes had a really important impact in the long term. They didn't really imagine the impact they had actually in our current cultural life, economic impact, and actually think that process will impact through centuries.
Yeah, I completely agree. And just thinking about the impact it had, we could start the social impact. I mean,
Okay. I'm gonna summarize the disadvantage of this Spanish colonization at that moment. So to summarize, first impact, I think it was the destruction of the indigenous cultures, because when the Spanish fleet landed in Latin at the end, they had to establish the new religion, the new culture. The only way to establish, to impose these legal systems, social structures, was by force, forcing indigenous people, because it will be really difficult to establish these systems without any violence. So first impact, I think, was the destruction of these new cultures, and from the other side, the Spaniard crowd tried to extract all the minerals. Yeah, I think this fact was really very important. The Spanish crowd took the advantage, and I think this was really particularly important to increase the power and the wealth of the crowd. And finally, I wanna mention how they set up a new rigid racial and social hierarchy, where the Spaniard and Europeans gather all the power, and they manage all the new colonies.
yeah.
And do you wanna mention another?
Yeah, for sure. I think you touched on a lot of them and a lot of good things and bad things. So, for instance, the bad things are just a lot of violence ensued. There was a lot of resistance and rebellion
Yeah.
across the natives. So, that's what started at the end. The Spanish armies were just too strong and they just overpowered the natives. And then some of the good things, at least for Spain, was the material extraction, like you mentioned. For the natives, the Latin people, it was a lot of negatives at first, I would say. Like you mentioned, they were put below essentially second class citizens if they
Yeah.
were considered citizens underneath the Spanish. They were marginalized and they were forced to rebel and resist if they had the chance. But over time, I think the social impacts are even seen today through, like, the Spanish helped them in the long term create a structure of governance. So creating
Mhm.
political systems, creating religion that wasn't centralized at the time. You had different portions of Latam who believed different things. So they had their own religions, but it was more natives, like native type religion. But when the Spanish brought Catholicism, it centralized the religion, and you could see even today how strong
Yeah.
Catholicism is.
Here, maybe we can say that although first impact was really negative, in the long term, maybe the technology and the systems turn into a new advanced structure,
Mhm.
political structure in the long term.
I like that. Yeah. And then moving on to the political impacts, which I think are intertwined, so they're connected with the
Mhm.
social impacts. But politically speaking, what was it like in Spain in terms of the political impact that colonization had? Do you want to speak on that, or do you want me to kick off with the
Okay,
Latam?
Can you
Uh,
repeat this?
the impact that colonization had on the political systems in both Spain and Latam.
Okay, regarding the political system, at the end we increased our territory, so this system got more complex to manage. So at the beginning was a bit difficult to manage all the territory. Yeah, it was really difficult because we had several open wars, and finally this complexity turned into a disaster and the inefficiency of the system. So although at the beginning seems to be a good investment, finally we got the opposite effect, increasing the political system.
I see. Yeah, and aside from the impact on Spain in Latam, it had an impact on, it completely changed how the territories or regions in Latam govern. So everything that Spain already had, they brought onto the Latam countries. So like
Okay.
they implemented a bureaucracy, they implemented court systems that the territories didn't have before. And they created a structure where essentially the Spanish ruled. So it was very top down in terms of Spanish ruling, setting the rules, and the natives were forced to follow the rules. And eventually,
Yeah.
over time, they adopted the same system, which is a good thing because it helped them establish order. But when it first happened, like when colonization first happened in the new regions in Latam, it was kind of a shock. Just like, here's what you're going to do, and we're going to tell you what to
Yeah,
do.
yeah, because they try to replicate the Spanish system into the new colonies, and yeah, at the end, indigenous people were not used to these political systems. They had a completely different culture, so it had to be really difficult to be adapted on the new system.
Yeah. And also, I think it's worth mentioning the importance that religion played in the political system because Spain, and you know more about this than I do, it's very, religion and the Catholic faith plays a part in how they govern, or at least they did at the time. It probably changed
Yeah,
from now to
exactly.
then.
That's the main religion of in the Spanish country. I think the values of these religions are completely different with the indigenous religion regarding the values, the structure of the religion. So I think both religion were not
Compatible?
compatible. They were not compatible. Yeah, even at this moment, I think it's really difficult to compatibilize like Catholicism or Islam. So imagine in the past compatibilize several religions. I think it's almost impossible, at least at that moment.
Yeah, I completely agree. That's a good point. They didn't really know what the religion was, and then
Yeah.
they were kind of forced.
Yeah, even they didn't know the indigenous religion. I think.
Yeah, I agree. And aside from the social and religious, I think these are all interrelated in a way, but there was also a huge economic impact that
Yeah, absolutely.
colonization had. Do you want to speak about it from the Spain perspective? Like how big of an impact did colonization have on the Spanish Empire competing with other countries in Europe?
The first impact, so Spain was benefit from the extraction of the minerals, mainly from the silver and gold minerals. So they increase the wealth, and these resources help Spain to become like the wealthiest and the most powerful empire at that moment. This enabled the Spanish crowd to get a better fleet and to improve the military resources.
I see. And it was important too because they were competing against other countries like the
Yeah,
UK and
exactly.
France. Yeah, and do you
Yeah,
have anything else you want to say on that? Or do you want me to discuss the Latam impacts?
yeah. Mainly, this was yeah, mainly this one is the most important. Yeah. And
Yeah.
do you mention the Latin impact, like the main economic Latin impact?
Yeah, for Latam, I think most of it when it began was completely negative. I mean, Spain came and they took the resources, like you mentioned. They just completely took the extracted all the minerals and resources. Aside from that, they also implemented a system, the encomienda system or the repartimiento system, essentially slave labor. So it was colonization was the beginning of slave labor in scale. So like there was slave labor in the past, but now we had slave labor at such a like it impacted so many people, and that was a negative impact on economically for Latam because the
Mm,
resources, human resources and material mineral resources were depleted by Spain, but it benefited Spain. But for like in the long term, it benefited Latam in the sense that the Spanish helped with innovation of how the people in Latam grew their crops. So they brought technologies that they could
yeah,
grow crops faster, better, and then how to sell their resources. So Spain helped Latam countries understand how to utilize or use their resources for financial benefit to create economic value. So that was one of the benefits, at least in the long run. I don't think there was any in the short term for
no,
Latam
in the
countries.
short term, I cannot imagine any short term benefit for the the colonies.
For sure.
Yeah,
Moving on to the next one. So we had this period of time where colonization ruled the world, and it had to come to an end at some point. Do you want to talk about a little bit how it ended in Spain or when that happened?
I mentioned before a bit. As the political system was really complex, this was the first point. It was really complex, and the Spanish crowd was not able to manage and control all the power. And at the end, there was a resistance in this part of the world, and the Spanish crowd had several open wars in Europe. So okay, you have several wars closer than the colonies, because here we were fighting against UK and France. Yeah, I think in the short terms, these wars had more impact on our political systems. So I think they put aside the colony wars and the colony resistance, and they were not able to manage the colonies. And the colonies started getting more power, and they finally got the independence thanks to this inefficiency of the system.
Yeah, it's once you have an empire so large, it's hard
Yeah,
um
that
to maintain it for so long.
yeah, and actually at that moment was really difficult to maintain all the empire, because all the European countries was trying to do the same to spread the territory and get all the territory as possible. So it was really complex to maintain it.
Yeah, for sure. And one thing I'll mention, aside from the complexity, after a certain amount of time, what also helped was Spain imposed a lot of their ideals on these countries, but these territories or regions. But a lot of these regions had their own identities and national identities. So
Yeah,
it was a difference that, they're not compatible like you were talking about earlier. Over time, people resist. So there
yeah,
was
exactly.
resistance that it just wasn't compatible and it wasn't practical to maintain for so
Yeah,
long.
exactly. And I think there was like a revenge feeling in the population. So
Revengeance?
yeah, revengeance.
Mm.
Like at the end, this culture was imposed. So I think it is almost impossible to maintain something it was imposed. We can put this topic on another open words at this moment, but anything imposed, I think, is possible to maintain it.
Yeah. And lastly, just to wrap everything up here, I think globalization impacted the world as we know it today, but it brought humanity together in a lot of ways, which we talked about. So it helped innovate and create national identities, of religion that we believe in, trade networks, cultural exchanges. It made the world a lot smaller by exploring the new land. So I think although there's a lot of negatives that came about, it also evolved into something that was beneficial and it helped shape the world as we know it today. Is there anything that you would like to add to that?
Yeah, I completely agree. What you just say, and yeah, only mention that in the current economic and social relationships between the Latin countries and Spain are really strong at this moment. Maybe thanks to the background and the relations we had in the past. Yeah, I think we complement now with efficiency, not as
Yeah, for sure. And we would never know what would happen if it wasn't Columbus who did not discover the New World first. But we do
yeah.
know that if he was not, or we do know how it did happen, and he was the first one to discover the New World. So the Spanish, the culture of Spain spread throughout Latam, and the ways we
Yeah.
mentioned, it's the way it happened today. So it's an interesting period, and we'll definitely have to do another topic on this. But I
Yeah, exactly.
think
It's
this was a good topic
a really big topic
for
and
sure.
really interesting.
Okay, well, thank you for joining us. We hope to see you at the next episode. We'll be discussing something else. Thank you.
Perfect. See you next episode.